evening. I'm Nigel Bookbinder, and welcome to Timeless Classics. Today we have the unique opportunity to look at excerpts from 4 classic tales, which all address the new accounting for leases. This marks a new chapter in the Book of Gap, as all leases will now be required to be capitalized by the lessee. Oddly enough, the manuscripts for reporting for the lessor have remained for the most part unchanged. But I fear we may be getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can put the lease on the balance sheet, we must first determine whether we even have a lease. Let's explore this issue in an excerpt from the E.B. What classic, Charlotte's website.
Why are you so upset, Wilbur?
Farmer Brown is so stressed out about whether he has a lease or not that he's gone on a bacon binge, and I'm scared I'm next on the menu.
If you can help him out, then he'll have to spare you. What's the basic rule?
Well, for the contract to contain a lease, it has to convey the right to control the use of an asset for a period of time for consideration.
That seems pretty simple. Let's share that information on your oinked-in page.
Do you really think this will help?
Trust me, Wilbur. People are very gullible. They believe everything they see on the internet. And it will make you look important. Too important to eat.
Be sure to add that the customer must obtain substantially all the economic benefits of the asset.
That will distinguish it from a service contract, won't it?
That's right. They won't want to capitalize a service contract.
Good point. What else?
And note that the customer must be able to direct the use of the asset.
That ought to do the trick. I've uploaded it to the web.
Oh, thank you, Charlotte. It's not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good accountant.
Well, it appears Wilbur learned the value of evaluating contracts to determine if they included a lease or not. So now we find ourselves with a lease, and we must put it on the statement of position. But how to perform such a daunting task? Let's explore this topic in an excerpt from the Nathaniel Hartburn classic, The Scarlet Ledger.
Esther, am I to understand ye must leave of Boston?
Yea, verily, I am being forced to leave, because I hath put my lease on the balance sheet.
Dost thou mean to tell me ye hath recorded both a liability for the future lease payment, as well as a right of use asset?
Yea, and the liability was recorded at the present value of the payments.
Why hath ye done this?
We capitalize in our waking moments, and we expense in our sleep. To maketh matters worse, I had to include any optional periods and purchase options that I expected to be reasonably certain to exercise.
That is scandalous. They burned 2 witches last week for the very same offense.
But I feareth my behavior is even more unbecoming.
By heaven, do tell.
For the asset, I began with the liability, but then I also hath included lease payments already made and initial direct costs.
Outrageous! Pray, tell me ye had the good sense to reduce the asset by any incentive ye hath received.
By grace I have, but the standard's effective date is drawing nigh, and I fear I can no longer borrow from the former lease standard to ease my present grief. I fear my time to depart has arrived, and so hath my ride share.
Poor child. But I fear her problems were only to worsen, for if there was any change in the contract that did not result in a new contract, then she would have to perform her calculations all over again. But now let's look to the subsequent measurement of the lease as we enjoy an exciting excerpt from the Ernest Hummingbird classic, The Old Man and the CPA.
Santiago, you've been out here for 84 days already. When are you going to address the subsequent measurement of the leases on your balance sheet?
As soon as I catch the largest fish ever caught. Besides, you're my CPA. I figured you could handle it.
Let him think that I am more woman than I am, and I would be so. I could, but I need information to do so.
Okay, so let's start with the finance lease.
You got lucky on that one. You'll handle it in the same basic manner as you did an old capital lease.
Every day is a new day. It is better to be lucky, but I would rather be exact. Then, when luck comes, you are ready.
Now, the operating lease is another story. That's the one that's going to get you.
But man is not made for defeat. A man can be destroyed by a lease, but not defeated.
You've been out in the sun too long. For an operating lease, you'll show a straight line expense in the income statement.
Well, that sounds like what I used to do. Just expense the payment.
But it's not the same. Your expense is based on the total cost of the lease rather than the payment.
What about the balance sheet?
That's the weird part. You'll accrue interest for both the liability and the asset, then reduce the liability by the payment and the asset by the expense.
I think you're the one who's been out in the sun too long. This is it! The catch of a lifetime!
I think we're going to need a bigger boat.
I have a feeling that Santiago is still reeling from that. But now we must sail on to our final tale. Let's turn to a science fiction classic as we learn about a fabled exception to putting the lease on the balance sheet. Here is an excerpt from Jules Verne's Around the World in 12 Months or Less.
Phileas, I can't believe you would make such a foolish wager.
How so, Passepartout?
Well, in front of the entire Reform Club, you have the audacity to make a wager that you will not have to capitalize your lease.
Anything one man can imagine, like simplifying lease accounting, other men can make real.
But how will you ever accomplish it? The standard states that all leases must go on the balance sheet of the lessee.
I have found a loophole for leases where the term of the lease is 12 months or less.
12 months or less? You expect us to use this lease balloon to go all the way around the world in 12 months or less?
Yes, and if I do, then I can simply expense the payments as I go.
But Phileas, you must include optional periods in the term if you are reasonably certain to exercise them.
Are you sure? I'm a little foggy on that little detail.
Sorry, Phileas. This will disqualify many a lease.
Look! We've reached New York City!
And right on time!
Well, perhaps the FASB may float another option for poor Phileas, but I certainly would not count on it. So, while his journey continues, ours must come sadly to an end. Join us next week on Timeless Classics when we look at excerpts from Lord of the Files and The Great Gatsby. Farewell.